Well, welcome everyone. Blessings to you. And so glad that you are checking out another episode of 30 Minutes With. I'm Marcia Jones-Washington, and I am the founder and facilitator of PA Women of Chaplaincy and Pastoral Care, which is an online networking ministry for women who are in those vocations or those areas of ministry. And we meet online and talk about different topics and that sort of thing. And this 30 Minutes With is an extension of that. So again, glad you were stopping by to check out one of the episodes or another episode. But today, this is going to be, I'm rather certain, a rather insightful conversation that we'll be having because we're going to be spending the next 30 minutes with Sarah Shirley. Sarah, how are you today?
I'm sorry. Good to see you, Marcia.
Yes, same here. And now, Sarah, I have to say, you're one of the few guests that I've interviewed up until this point that I've actually met in person. One other person, we used to be in the same small group through church. You know, there were those small groups that would meet at someone's home, and so one of the people we were in the same small group like that. But you're just the second person that I've actually met, and we've had conversations and things like that. So this is great. But I have to say, Sarah, even though we do kind of know each other personally, I'm surprised that I have never found out from you what is it that led you to join the military. And so why don't you share at this time what led you in that direction?
Yeah, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I was born in January of 1960, and the Vietnam War was happening. And so my family and pretty much everybody I knew were anti-war activists. And I was really just kind of brokenhearted about the way that people treated military members and veterans, because I guess they didn't know their civics. They didn't understand that the military was not the ones who set the policy. And we see today in the United States, people don't understand civics. And they didn't back then either. And so, I was an anti-war activist who was very sympathetic and supportive of soldiers, airmen, sailors, Marines, and veterans, because I felt like they were just the fodder that we were sending to war. And so I always wanted to be a military chaplain, because I'm an Episcopal priest, and I think that the Episcopal faith is, we call ourselves walking the via media, the middle way. So we're Catholic yet Protestant. We have very little doctrine. We believe in setting a wide table. God welcomes people to the communion table. It's not about church policies. And so one of the things that our clergy are trained to do is to live in the realities of the world and not expect people to be perfect or perfectly consistent, and be able to sit with people in the tensions of living in the real world. And so I wanted to be a chaplain from when I was a kid. And then when I went to college, it was 1976, and I went to Loyola University, and they had Army ROTC. So I joined Army ROTC after making sure that I would look good in the uniform, of course, And I'm sure I would have gone straight through and gone into the military, but I had some health issues, and so I wasn't able to. But then many years later, so I guess I was 16 when I joined Army ROTC in college. And then when I was almost 40, I was commissioned, first in the Army Reserve and then in the regular Air Force. And so my 9th month on active duty, I deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. You know, my 9th month on active duty was September of 2001. And so right after 9/11, I deployed. And I had been operating for years. I've always been very naive, and which doesn't make a lot of sense to me that I'm so naive, because I know a lot of people, I've had a lot of experiences, I'm fairly well educated and well read. I guess I just am in denial about what people are really like, because sometimes it's too painful. And so I thought that people of faith, especially Christians, right? Those of us who follow the Prince of Peace, you know, Peter, put down your sword, beat your swords into plowshares, be killed instead of fighting back, right? Be executed like Jesus was. I thought that Christians were supposed to be pacifists, which is, I do believe that is accurate. That's my personal theology, but I know that historically that's not true. I mean, I study, you know, just war theory, and I know that that was a compromise between the Christian church and the empire. But I mean, the idea of going to war out of love for your enemy is a little bizarre. So anyway, I was so surprised to learn that all these Christians that were in the military were not actually pacifists. I was so stupid. So I go to war, and I'm like the only So I thought, these are people of faith who are also patriots. So they need great chaplains who can sit with them in this tension of doing the wrong thing out of doing the motive of doing the right thing. So anyway, so I joined the military. I go off to this war, and I learn that most people of faith, most Christians, are not in any way, shape, or form pacifists. I did meet with several who were, people that really, you know, were doing exactly what I thought, which is sort of compromising some of their principles to go and serve their country. And most were not. All the chaplains where I was stationed were Christian, but I was the only one who preached out of the New Testament. Everybody else was preaching out of the book of Daniel, trying to justify us being there in this war. So I learned a lot. It was really quite heartbreaking. But, you know, it was pretty cool that I was getting to do what I'd always felt I should do, which was, you know, go serve soldiers, airmen, sailors, Marines, and Coast Guards. By then, we were deploying coasties by then to war zones. And so go and serve them in the event of war. And so I got to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And what you've just said, you covered so much, and you touched upon some questions that I was going to have. And let's just go back to the fact that you were near 40 at the time when you were, you know, deployed. And, you know, coming into the military at that age, do you feel like that even made it a bit tougher for you, or not necessarily?
Well, I think it made it much easier for me to be very solid as a chaplain. You know, I was certainly very well formed in my pastoral identity, and I had a lot of experience as a leader. And so I wasn't likely to get pushed around into doing things that were not appropriate, which I have seen some less seasoned chaplains, you know, want to go be one of the guys and want to kind of go native with the special operators, or they want to go out and qualify, you know, firing weapons on the firing range. And, you know, we're non-combatants. We don't carry weapons of any kind. We don't carry any materials of war. So not maps, battle plans, ammunition, because that would compromise our non-combatant status. And so I think it was an advantage to be an experienced older person. Now, I was not the oldest person in my chaplain class. There were in the chaplain class that I was in, it was actually the summer after I turned 40. So the summer of 2020. And then I went on active duty that following January. I was not, there were 86 of us. There were 7 women and 79 men, 86 people, and some were chaplain candidates, which means they were not ordained yet. They were in seminary. And then, most of us were chaplains, fully qualified chaplains. And I was not the oldest. There were some people who were prior service, like they'd been enlisted members, and then one guy had even retired after 20 years in service, or retired in his late 30s, or maybe even older, and then gone to seminary, became a Jesuit. And, to become a Jesuit priest is many years of training. So he was in his 50s. I will say he was still very fit. He was our second fastest runner out of the 86 of us.
Okay.
So, yet, there's this thing called grass drills that the kids do in basic training, where you'll be standing in place running. They say, go. The drill sergeant says, go. And you run in place. And then they say, I can't remember, drop or front or something like that. And then you have to get face down on the ground. And then you've got to do burpees, or I don't know, you have to do all this crazy stuff. They wouldn't let us do that until we had all passed our physical fitness tests, because they were afraid we'd hurt ourselves. So after we'd all passed, then they let us do it. And we were very slow, and some did get hurt, because, it was boot camp for middle-aged chaplains.
Okay. Again, this is all very informative to me. I'm learning a lot here, because I just thought, it seemed to me, I recall seeing recruiting ads where an individual, the oldest you could be was something like 34. So again, with you going in at 40, that I found that to be very informative, very enlightening.
Well, it's usually, doctors, dentists, chaplains, people that are already in their profession that go in at that age.
I see. And yeah, and also it surprised me that it seemed from a very young age, or you knew that chaplaincy was the path that you wanted to pursue. And how is it that you knew even what a chaplain did, or was there anyone in your family or anyone around you that was in ministry?
It was probably from watching war movies. I loved war movies.
Okay.
Could be. I mean, I knew I was to be a priest from when I was a little girl, when I was like 7 years old. And they actually used to call me the chaplain of the grammar school.
Really?
Yeah, I know, it's weird. If they needed a prayer, or if somebody's pet died, there I'd go and I'd do a little funeral. I know.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is kind of funny, because I was never like, a church geek, really. I just always, that's what I thought I should do.
There must have been something about you.
I asked my mother 10 years ago or something, when I was in my 50s, I said, hey, Mom, what do I want to be when I grew up? When I was a kid. And I thought she was going to tell me, a doctor, or a lawyer, or a judge, or something like that. And she said that I wanted to be a priest, a protester, and a soldier. And I wanted to be all three at the same time.
Isn't that something?
Kind of turned out that way.
Yes. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, Sarah, I had wanted this episode to be about remembering 9/11 and talking a little bit about that. And so it seems, from my understanding, you had not yet been, I don't know, you weren't accepted into, or you weren't serving yet?
I was serving. I was a chaplain, one of the chaplains at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas. I was off that day. It was one of my, because we worked on the weekends, and so we would have a day off during the week. And I was off that day, and obviously everybody got called in, and so because everything went on lockdown, so we went in, and it was interesting because we just went in and did whatever we were asked to do. And since I wasn't scheduled to be on duty, they asked me to do extra counseling coverage. So I went to one of the chapels and saw the walk-in counselees. And, a lot of times people think, that don't have experience in the military, they think that people in the service are different than other people somehow. And I guess they would think that, oh my goodness, the country's just been attacked, so people are going to want counseling about, violence and war and going off, blah, blah. The counseling sessions that I had that day were all standard marital conflict. Because that's people, right? So conflicts in relationships, money problems, marriage problems with your supervisor. Really, and that's what we were doing that day. Now, there were certainly people who had family that worked in the World Trade Center that, had concerns. And so we did deal with some of those things, but that was, kind of later in the day and in bigger groups. And then I deployed shortly after that. There were two of us that went from that base. It was a training base. So it wasn't like we had big operational units that would have been, springing into action. So there were just two of us who initially deployed. I went first, and it's been declassified now, but I went to Masira Island, Oman, which was a highly classified location back then because we set up our combat search and rescue operations. We had war reserve materiel there. So that's in between wars. We kept things there like helicopters and ammunition and, war material. It's called WRM, War Reserve Material. And so from there, we set up first in Pakistan our combat search and rescue operations, because before we send people into harm's way, we want to be able to get them out. Mm-hmm. So that was the first thing we did there. And so it at one time was a very large intermediate staging base. We had 5,000 people moving through on any given day. And then later it became kind of a R&R place, so a place that people could come for a break from being in Afghanistan.
Right.
Yeah, so I was there for about 6 months, and we built the base and had lots of really interesting experiences. And, I'm pastoring a church now in Mexico, and I'm in Mexico because of having lunch with another priest who I met 25 years ago in Oman, because we had done this humanitarian mission and helped save this Bedouin girl's hand from being amputated due to a giant cell tumor. And we worked with the health minister of Oman, and he wanted to meet me and say thank you. So the base commander sent me over to Muscat. And this woman, this other priest, Pamela, was there because that same health minister had recruited her husband, who is a biology professor, to come and help start a medical college in Oman. So there we were. And then I ran into her again 25 years later, and just because of that renewed friendship, we ended up talking about where to move. And she said, there's some churches in Mexico that are looking for priests. And so if it wasn't for going to Oman,
yes,
Audra would not have her hand, and I would not be the rector at St. Andrew's Anglican in Chapala. So life is, Life
That
is
is
life.
so fascinating. Yeah. And, I see that really as being, a God thing. I mean, to me, something like that is too, it's too, I don't know, not planned, but it just seems out of the realm of being coincidental. Let's say it's just a
Right.
purpose thing. I feel like it's a God thing, as the only way I can explain it. But I did want to go back to you now being deployed to Oman. Is that the way it's been, Oman?
Yeah.
Because I wanted to ask a couple things in terms of exactly, what part of the world that's in for those who may not know. I mean, I'm not that familiar, but where is that? And then I'm just wondering, once you arrived there, was the mood or tone there a bit different than from what you had left when you were, at the Shepherd's Air Force Base?
Oh, yeah. So it was really interesting. When we first go over in what's called a contingency operation, meaning it's like, oh my goodness, something's happened, let's go, until it gets into like steady state. So we were just sent to wherever we could get on planes and go. And I went to Tinker Air Force Base and flew over. I think I was on a C-5 with a lot of communication people that were going from Tinker. And so, you get there and we started building a base. And it was very exciting. And you could get anything you wanted. The commander wanted a beautiful chapel built. So one day the contracting officer walks in with an oriental rug rolled up over his shoulder because his church back home had an oriental rug. So he figured we'd need one to put in front of the altar.
Okay.
And then as things get to be more steady state, it's not nearly as fun, right? Because then everything's very rigid. But at the beginning, we were just trying to get stuff done and take care of people. Because we were sending, kids who were scared, right? We into this unknown combat situation. And then we also had people that were very experienced military members, but they'd never been to war. And so they were used to, when they deploy, they could just kind of live their life as normal. There's regular mail runs and there's email and phones. Well, we were in this highly classified location. We were in a communication blackout. So I remember this master sergeant coming to me and saying, how am I going to pay my bills? I'm not married. I brought all my checks and my bills with me. How am I going to get my bills paid? So a lot of our stuff was just very, very practical things like that. Especially when you're in like a communication lockdown, and people were used to hearing from their family and friends when they were deployed, because being deployed was not like going to war. Being deployed was just like going and doing some stuff in another place.
I
Yeah.
see. And Oman, from my understanding, it is located though in the Middle East. Is that correct?
Right. It's in the Middle East. It's beautiful. The Arabian Sea is beautiful, and I was very grateful I got to go to Muscat because that was gorgeous and fun. But being on the base, it was very interesting, and it was very interesting from a ministry perspective, because we were actually adjacent to, sort of inside almost, a Royal Air Force of Oman base. And they had a contract with the Royal British Air Force or Navy. I don't remember now, sorry. But to do training exercises. So when we arrived, there were these like routine training exercises going on with the British military. And that obviously wrapped up, because then everybody was in a real world, combat situation. But there were contractors there that had been there for years, that were from India and Sri Lanka and Pakistan. And they would work there 11 months out of the year and then be home with their families 1 month out of the year. And many of these were Roman Catholic, a couple of Protestants. And so they had a little faith community there that met every single week, not on Sunday because the high holy days in the Muslim countries, the days off are, Thursday, Friday. And so the base commander, allowed my staff and me to go and serve that little church.
Yeah, well, that seems like it was an interesting time, Sarah. But I just want to, for a moment, take you back to, the day of 9/11 itself, September 11th. It seems it was, pretty much a regular day for you where you were in terms of counseling. But I just wonder, once you had an opportunity to really see what had happened and, in New York, you know, what were some of your feelings, or can you recall what feelings you may have had about, just the whole gravity of that situation, that tragedy?
It was really an interesting situation, because, we have been so privileged to have never been attacked on our soil, right? And I saw many reasons that people from other countries would be very angry with the United States. And so I could understand why there would be attacks against the United States. I mean, we're pretty arrogant. We're not very knowledgeable about other countries. And yeah, so I mean, it, in a lot of ways, from a human perspective, it made sense to me. And it was very interesting to think about what is an appropriate response, right? When something like that happens. And, did we make an appropriate response? I don't know. I mean, it's certainly not what our faith would tell us to do. And I don't know how practical it was. And so, I mean, I thought about a lot of things like that. I was also amazed at how many people that I knew, like, my son's best friend was supposed to be working in the World Trade Center that day. And he had taken the day off to go try to promote this business that he was trying to promote. So he was not killed. My cousin was in the Army. She was a West Point grad, career Army person, and she was working for the Human Resources Command. It was called PERSCOM then, I think, but now it's the Human Resources Command. Their office was in Alexandria, and there was a meeting in the Pentagon every other week, or every week, but she and this other officer would alternate covering the meeting, and it was her week. And the other officer leaned into her officer and said, "Hey, Mary, I don't have anything going on. I'll go cover, because I know you've got that big project." He died because it was that meeting was the conference room that was hit at the Pentagon, and, left a wife and kids. And so, so there's a lot of stuff like that where people who weren't supposed to be places were, so they were safe, and other people weren't supposed to be places where they were, and so they died. And so lots of people with survivor guilt and all this other stuff. And I also remember, some of the course directors wanted all the chaplains to come and have big, like, town hall meetings with all the tech students to talk about just what's happening, how are they doing, how are their families. And I had this first sergeant who'd been a security forces officer, or not officer, but a security forces troop before he became a first sergeant. And he came to me, he said, "Now listen, ma'am, these guys don't need any of that coddling, don't need any of that hoochie coochie, namby-pamby stuff." And I'm like, "Don't worry, sir. Don't worry for a second. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna wrap them up in pink blankets and tell them to, it was it's just, yeah. Those are
Okay.
the kinds of things that I remember about that day. So yeah, so it was but I mean, I went back to that same war. So that was what, 9/11 was 2001, right? And
Right.
I know you called me about this when you saw that article about one of my former patients in the Times, and that was 2010, 2011. So 10 years later, I deployed to Afghanistan with the same conflict.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And before we close out, I was just going to say, and going back to in terms of your feelings about our response to 9/11 and what happened that day. I was thinking, and of course, your perspective is from that of someone who's a pacifist, and that sort of thing. And I'm sure you understand that there are probably many people who feel like, yes, we did have the appropriate response, or something did need to happen
right.
after that. So, yeah.
Well, I I couldn't think of what else to do at the time, but a couple of years later, maybe it's just a year later, it was sometime within a year after I got back, they were doing a big thing for distinguished visitors, so like city officials, businessmen, business people, things like that, where they had them come to breakfast at Shepherd Air Force Base and have a tour and a mission briefing. And then they went up on a bus to Tinker Air Force Base where they were going to do the same thing. And then they were going to fly them back on I've lost my connection. Are we back? There, we're back. So we went up on a bus and then they were going to fly them back on a C-130. And the commander asked this Gulf War pilot and me to be the entertainment on the bus. So the combat pilot and the combat chaplain were giving talks on the bus. So they made these posters of different photos from when I was in Oman and the different things we did. And I gave a talk and the pilot gave a talk. Well, they were not going to have us to lunch and the tour and fly back. They had a staff car follow us up there. And so when we got off the bus, we had to get in the car and go back to work. And the staff car driver thought it'd be really cool to have a fighter pilot drive the car and drive us back. Well, he got lost and he wouldn't ask for directions. It was horrible. It was like hours getting back. So we never did get back to work. But they were talking about what was the right thing to do. It was very interesting. And the pilot said, yeah, the whole Middle East is terrible. We should just, bomb the whole thing and pave it over and make it a parking lot. I mean, very harsh. Well, the staff driver was a middle-aged woman, like me, like I was at the time. And she said, well, I think what we should do is buy every Afghan woman a washer and dryer and other kitchen appliances and make their lives better. And if all the women's lives are better, they're not going to let those men be so violent.
Mm.
Who knows the right thing to do? Great thing about being a chaplain is if you're a medic or a chaplain, you don't have to have any opinions about anything. You get the privilege of taking care of the enemy with the same level of love and care that you take care of your own closest troops. And I mean, that's a privilege. You get no judgment, treat everybody this. It's not easy to do. I mean, one of the things that I did regularly in Afghanistan later when I went back to the hospital was give workshops on caring for the enemy because that was hard for people.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Well, everyone, I had said this would be an informative or insightful interview, and it certainly was. I'm pretty sure we went over 30 minutes here. But the thing of it is, we wanted to, reflect upon 9/11 and just how some people were impacted. And I just have to take a moment to say thank you to those who were in service in the military that day, but also thank you to those who were emergency workers, EMTs, police officers, firefighters. Thank you to chaplains and clergy people who were in service in that day in some capacity. So, and Sarah, thank you again for being here, and for everyone. Again, thank you for tuning in, and I just certainly hope and pray that you will be well, be encouraged, and please be here next time for another episode of 30 Minutes With. All right, God bless.